from my last video. I found today's questions in the last. Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kate and I'm a certified sex educator with ADHD, and my area of special interest is the intersection between sex, intimacy, and neurodivergency, and how all of that can affect relationships. Over the past 2 years, I have built a community of almost 2 million people across all of my social media platforms, and it has been one of the best experiences of my entire life, but it does mean that I get a lot of mail. And in that mail are thousands of incredible questions about sex and intimacy and how they are impacted by our neurodivergencies. The problem is that I don't have time to answer every single email that I get, but a lot of the questions that I get are ones that I get all the time. And so I'm starting a new series called Ask Kate, where I take some of my favorite questions and I answer them because I think that they're going to be useful for a lot of people to hear. Context out of the way, let's get started. Somebody pointed out in my last video that I forgot my traditional introduction, so I'm sorry about that, but we are going to talk about sex and intimacy today, so if you're not in the space to hear that, or if you're not in a place where you can hear it, feel free to grab a fruit snack on the way out. I'm going to add one in post because I lost mine. I found today's question in the comment section of the last video that I did, and there is a lot to unpack in this question. So let's jump right in, take a look at the question, and go from there. So the question says, I have ADHD and I'm demisexual. When I'm trying to feel in the mood, I need more rev up. My partner doesn't and doesn't understand, so usually I'm just like, meh. Then I feel bad because I'm not wanting sex the same way he is. What is the best way to communicate this? I get mad and sad after sex because I just wasn't there, and I feel like when I get there, he's done. So I'm angry he's done and sad because I'm not. Is this normal, or am I the only one? I've tried talking to him about it, but it seems to go in one ear and out the other. First off, thank you so much for that question. Thank you so much for trusting me with your question, and thank you so much for that vulnerability that you showed in asking that question, because you are not the only one, and this is a very, very common issue for many, 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 many people all over the world. And I want to be very clear, especially in conversation with the answer to this question, this is not a neurodivergent thing. This isn't an ADHD thing. This isn't a anything thing. This is just simply about how our bodies work and how arousal works. Before we get into it, there is one term that I want to define right off the bat, and that is demisexual. I myself am also demisexual, so I'm super glad that you brought that up. But for people who might not know what that is, or might not know how to contextualize that within the sort of broader spectrum of sex and sexuality, I want to talk about that first. So demisexual is a sexual orientation that is defined by only feeling sexual attraction to somebody after they formed a strong emotional bond with them. Now, a lot of people hear demisexual people describe their experience and they say, okay, well, you're not into one-night stands. What's the big deal? You don't need a special label for that. But for many demisexual people, it actually goes a lot deeper than that, because demisexuality is about feeling sexual attraction as you're sort of living your life in the world. For instance, if I see a super hot celebrity, I don't think that person is hot. I don't think that person is attractive. I'm not thinking of that, celebrity or famous, handsome movie star in a sexual way. I don't feel that towards them. And so I don't get aroused or turned on, fantasizing about Tom Hiddleston, because I don't know what it's like to, I kind of know what it's like to hang out with Tom Hiddleston. That's another story for another day. But I don't know what it's like to be in a relationship with that celebrity. I don't know what it's like to experience a partnership with that celebrity. And so that really inhibits my ability to get turned on and sexually aroused. So demisexuality is about an emotional bond, and that emotional bond is a core component of what you need to really be turned on and be sexually attracted to somebody and to enjoy the sexual experience. Now, demisexuality is under the sort of umbrella of asexuality, and it's important to remember that asexual people can experience sexual attraction. Asexual people can want to have sex. that is okay. That doesn't invalidate their asexual experience. Now, there are some asexual people who are sex repulsed and they want nothing to do with sex and nothing to do with like a sexual relationship. But many asexual people enjoy sex and enjoy the experience of having sex, but they don't necessarily experience sexual attraction in the same way an allosexual person would. Now, the other part to keep in mind, because there is always more that you can talk about and unpack when we talk about sexual identity, is that romantic attraction is different than sexual attraction. In fact, there are all different kinds of attraction. There's sexual attraction, there's romantic attraction, there's aesthetic attraction, there's emotional attraction and sensual attraction and intellectual attraction. And everybody has a different relationship to those. For instance, somebody who is really interested in romantic attraction may not want to be in a sexual relationship with their partner because they are not sexually attracted to them, they're only romantically attracted to them. And that is totally okay and valid as long as everybody is on board and everything is being discussed and consent is had by all. There is no one right way to love. There is no one right way to be in a relationship. And so when we talk about demisexuality, when we talk about asexuality, there can be this narrative that like, there's something wrong with you. It's weird that you don't experience sexual attraction, or it's weird that you're gray sexual and, you know, you only experience sexual attraction sometimes. And that's simply and fundamentally not true. Asexual people are valid. Demisexual people are valid. Everybody on the spectrum of sexuality is valid, and invalidating those experiences or telling somebody that their experience is fundamentally wrong because it doesn't match yours or your understanding, that's not cool. So anyway, I got really into that, but I'm really passionate about talking about demisexuality because I can kind of look at sex very objectively, and I love teaching about it and I love educating about it. But if you say, do you want to have sex or do you want to have pizza? Probably gonna choose pizza more often than not. All right, but let's get back to the rest of this amazing question. Getting in the mood for sex is more than just answering the question, do you want to have sex right now? It is a physical process. It is an emotional process. It is a mental process, which I suppose is kind of like an emotional process, but anyway, moving on. And it can take different people different amounts of time to get turned on, to get aroused, to be ready for sex. There are a lot of misconceptions about how long it really takes somebody to get ready for sex, especially if that person has a vulva. Because if you ask a lot of people, the general consensus seems to be between 5 and 7 minutes and you should be ready to go. And in actuality, science and more up-to-date and current research tells us that it's more like 20 to 30 minutes before a vulva is really actually ready for sex. Now, the physical reaction to a vulva being ready for sex is that there is increased blood flow to the area and sensation is heightened, and the vagina begins to lubricate itself in order to make sex more comfortable for everybody involved. Now that's what's happening with the vulva, with the body, with the physical reaction to sex, but that doesn't have anything to do with your mental state. Your body can be raring to go, but you can still be worrying about the laundry or the dishes or picking the kids up from daycare. Similarly, you can be super turned on and be, reading porn and, fantasizing about your partner and like be in a really, really good headspace, but have your body not cooperate at all. Your body isn't showing signs of being turned on. Your body isn't getting ready for sexual interaction. It's just like, meh. This has a specific term. It's called arousal non-concordance. And that phrase was brought into sort of public discourse around sex and sexuality by Dr. Emily Nagoski, who wrote a book called Come As You Are, which if you haven't read it, #1 best book ever about sex. It will change your life. I'll put a link to it down in the little thing, because seriously, I cannot recommend it enough. It is such a good book. All right, so things are going well. We've got blood flowing to our vulva. It's becoming engorged. Our clitoris is waking up. Our brain is telling us that like these sexual signals are good and like we're getting into the mood. But again, this is a 20 to 30 minute process. And it's really important to remember too that this is not a commentary on your partner. This is not a commentary on like your unwillingness to get turned on in a speedy amount of time. This is a physiological reaction that science tells us takes about that long. And so a lot of times unhealthy red flag partners will, get mad or get frustrated and say, hurry up. Why is it taking so long? Why aren't you getting turned on? And the answer to that is simple, is that desire is incredibly different than physical arousal. And so you can have one without the other, but it's not a commentary on anything. But a mismatched desire or arousal level isn't an insult or a passive-aggressive statement on, how good you are at sex. It's just what is happening in your partner's body. And so being supportive of that is really important because, like we talked about earlier, headspace, desire, getting in the mood, getting turned on mentally and emotionally, being able to sort of shut out the rest of the world and be there with your partner, that's going to be a lot more difficult if your partner is saying, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. Are you turned on enough yet? Are you, wet enough yet? Or whatever it may be. Now, like I said earlier, I get questions like this a lot. And there's usually a few breakdowns in communication that happen in a situation like this. One of the things that I most commonly run into is this idea of safe zones to talk about sex. And so what happens with a lot of people is that the bedroom is where sex happens. The bedroom is where I look at my partner and I say, hey, do you want to have sex? Or, I start instigating sex or instigating foreplay or whatever that may be. But that conversation starts when I'm in sight of the bed. It doesn't start in the afternoon, texting my partner and saying, hey, would you maybe be interested in having sex this fine day? How would you feel about being intimate tonight? DTF? There's a lot of different ways that you can tell your partner that you're in the mood or interested in getting into the mood or want to share intimacy with them. There's no one right way to do it. There's no one right way to have that conversation. But just to start, one thing that can be very helpful is talking about it a little bit earlier in the day. And that's really helpful for a couple of reasons. Now, the first thing that does is let everybody know that, sex is on the table tonight. That also means that if something happens, one partner might be able to say, hey, I know that we talked about having sex tonight, but this thing happened, and so I don't think I'm really going to be able to be present for you, and give the other partner an opportunity to really support them and work through that with them. Similarly, if you have a partner like me who really struggles to get in the headspace and get out of work mode and to sort of get into a place where they can allow themselves to be relaxed and aroused and turned on, having that conversation before you get into the bedroom at the end of the day gives that partner an opportunity to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to make sure that, the dishwasher is unloaded, or I'm going to start easing out of my workday at 5 p.m. instead of 7 p.m. so I can be more present for my partner. I changed my clothes for dinner and the audio on this section was really bad, so I'm just going to re-record it right now, but haha, costume change! Another thing that can be really helpful in a situation like this is to reframe how you are approaching sex together as a partnership. For instance, orgasm doesn't need to be the goal of sexual intimacy. You can touch each other, you can enjoy each other's presence and each other's bodies without turning it into a race to the proverbial finish line. You can also make space to be intimate with each other in different ways. For me especially, I love back rubs. They are my favorite things in the entire world. And so that is a way that I share intimacy with my partner without necessarily engaging in sex. And so in a lot of cases, when we see a situation like this happening where one partner is feeling very rushed and another partner is, done by the time that that partner is ready to go, I really encourage to spend time together, be intimate with each other. Don't just rush in and race in order to just get it over with and get the job done, but rather make it an exploration of intimacy and love and trust and vulnerability, and take the idea that you have to orgasm for sex to be good off the table completely. However, this question asks specifically, what is the best way to communicate this? And this is where I'm going to give a little bit of tough love, but also be just really honest. There is no perfect way. There is no perfect way to have any vulnerable conversation. I've talked about this in one of my other videos before, but I think one of the most damaging narratives that we have surrounding conversations about sex and intimacy and consent is that there is a perfect way to do it. There is a perfect way to have that conversation. There is a perfect way to communicate your needs, your wants, your desires to your partner. And once you find that sort of magical combination, all of your problems will be solved. And That's not the case. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try, and it doesn't mean that you shouldn't have these conversations. But I think what's more important than having a perfect conversation is having a conversation. And it's okay if that conversation is clunky. It is okay if that conversation is awkward. It is okay if you struggle to find the words. And it is more than okay if you need to, write down your thoughts ahead of time to make sure that, you say what you need to say. All of those approaches are totally valid, but having the conversation is the most important thing. Now, one thing that stuck out to me about this question in particular was the end, where our commenter said, "I've tried talking to him about it, but it seems to go in one ear and out the other." Now, I'm always really hesitant to start off the bat by saying, "That's a red flag for me, dog."
Warning! Red flag!
Because I don't think that's fair to either party. But I will say this. It might be useful if you're not feeling heard or acknowledged by your partner to start with that before you jump into conversations about sex and intimacy. Talk about the idea that sometimes when I bring stuff up, I feel like you aren't actively listening to me, or I feel like we have these conversations and then, we go off, and then a couple of days later, it feels like everything's been forgotten. Addressing that might be a really good place to start, because frankly, sometimes, especially if your partner is neurodivergent, sometimes we just forget. Sometimes we have trouble remembering and prioritizing and saying, okay, I remember that we talked about on Thursday that we might be intimate with each other or something like that. And so addressing that and saying, hey, I really need you to make that effort for me. I really need to feel intimate with you. I really need to feel like we're sharing space together and we can have safe conversations. And I really need to trust that you're going to not forget them tomorrow. That can be a really powerful place to start. Okay, but how do I communicate what I want? I do have some specific suggestions for this. Now, if you're not familiar, I feel statements can be really useful. An I feel statement is basically saying exactly that. I feel blank when you blank. Now, the beauty of an I feel statement is that you're not putting blame onto your partner. You're not telling them that they're a bad partner or a bad person. What you're doing is you're being honest about your own lived experience. So saying, I feel lonely and isolated from you when we rush through sex, that is a very vulnerable thing to say to your partner. I feel neglected and that my pleasure is not as important as your own. That doesn't say that your partner is a bad person or a bad partner. But again, that might be a really important wake-up call for your partner to hear if your partner hasn't really heard a lot about where you're coming from or how you feel about things. Secondarily, expressing needs is always super valid. You are allowed to say, I need us to spend at least 10 to 15 minutes together just exploring each other's bodies and touching each other, doing back rubs, that kind of thing, before we jump into sex. I need there to be clean sheets on the bed before we have sex. I need to get sushi after we're done having sex because I get hungry. Whatever your needs may be, but those needs are incredibly valid and you have the right to express them in your relationship. And so if your need is that you need your partner to spend more time getting you aroused and getting you in the mood and helping you get to that place of intimacy and vulnerability, that is totally valid. Now, lastly, I do want to say this. In this comment, there were a couple of times where the commenter said that they feel bad and they feel sad, and that makes me sad because it is a very common thing for our bodies to take a while to rev up, especially after working a long day, especially after taking care of kids, especially after managing a household, especially after the 3 years of ongoing constant trauma that has been living through a pandemic. We all have a lot going on, and expecting ourselves, demanding of ourselves to just be turned on at a drop of a hat, to just be ready to go because my partner needs me to be ready to go. It's not honoring yourself. That's not taking care of yourself. And so I really encourage you to be patient with yourself. Be kind to yourself. Be understanding. Give yourself the grace and compassion that you would give somebody else in your shoes, because you are not broken and you are not alone. I was really hesitant to talk about this because, again, I don't know the full story and I don't have the full picture. And so in some ways it feels irresponsible to speak to this, but also as an educator, I think it's important to at least not acknowledge it. If you have these conversations, if you bring these concerns to your partner and your partner consistently ignores them, invalidates them, you know, makes you the bad guy, tells you that you're wrong about how you feel, gets hyper defensive or hypercritical of you, those can be red flags. If you start to feel like you're not being supported and not being heard and not being listened to by your partner, it may be time to reevaluate that relationship, or perhaps even consider something like professional couples counseling who can help you sort of work through those issues together. But this is really important. There is a difference between struggling to communicate with your partner, not communicating with your partner, and communicating with your partner, but your partner ignoring that and pretending like you've never communicated at all. Those are three different things and three very different scenarios. So I can't tell you where you are in that set of three, but I can tell you that you are worthy of love. You are worthy of having your concerns and your needs met. You are worthy of pleasure, and it is not a big deal if you take a little bit longer to get turned on. All right, everybody. Well, this one got way longer than I thought it was going to, but again, I love getting to do these longer form deep dive into these really incredible and amazing questions. So once again, if you have a question for me that you would like to see answered here, please feel free to email me. You can do that by emailing kate@catieosaurus.com. You can also just leave a comment here below if you're okay with everybody sort of seeing your comments. And feel free to go ahead and follow me on all of my other socials. I have a Twitch, I have a TikTok, I have a Twitter, I have an Instagram. I would say that I have a YouTube, but you're here. I also have a podcast. It's called Katie and Eric's Infinite Quest, an ADHD adventure. We talk about life with ADHD and depression and navigating life as neurodivergent adults. We also do talk a lot about sex and intimacy, and sometimes we play D&D. And then lastly, if you do want to support the work that I do, if you like what I'm doing here, ways that you can help me out that don't cost anything: you can subscribe, you can hit the notification button, you can share my videos with a friend who you think might enjoy them. And if you do want to put a little in the tip jar, I have a Venmo, I have a Patreon, and I also have a spicy site. And so if you want to check out my spicy content, you can check out mostlypans.com. But all right, everybody, thank you so much for watching. I'll be back next week. I am going to be at Gen Con next week. So I'm going to probably make some videos from Gen Con, but I'm going to be a little bit slower on the editing process because of it. But if you're going to go to Gen Con, I'll see you there. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.